morning. Thanks for coming again. Thanks for supporting our summer adult ed, journey, my journey. And this is a different spot on the journey today. Jason Perez here to talk about where he is on his journey, where I am and how I got here. And he's about a different spot. He says halfway through his journey. I don't know do the math. I don't know where that gets you. He and his wife Edith have been coming here with their children for 2 years, and former head of the deacons. Let me take a quick prayer. For God, thank you for this journey. And you didn't promise everything would be perfect, but you did promise that you'd be there for us. You did pick us up and hold us up. And thank you for how you worked in Jason's life and what made his talk be a blessing to us and an encouragement to us in our journeys. Name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Terry. So, as Terry said, I kind of look at this. I'm halfway through, doing the math. Hopefully, I'm a little under, but you never know. So we'll just go with that. When Terry first asked me and said, could you share your faith journey? My initial reaction was to say no. I don't have much of a faith journey when I look back at it. I don't have any very large events or any, I was on the streets, living a life, and God came and, shone his light, and I turned my life around. So it was hard to say, well, is anyone really going to want to hear and stay awake, during my journey here? So I'll give it my best. But as I kept thinking, I said, well, I don't want to take anything away from God, because even though I've known God, I am not perfect by any means, and which is why my kids aren't here, because they would tell you other ways I'm not perfect. So God's work, God's touched my life, and so I think it is worth sharing that, for what it is and for what it's worth. Even since I was little, people would ask, at what point did you start serving God? What was that point you believed? And where I grew up in the Pentecostal church, we said, when did you get saved? And I would say, I don't know when. It was, I've had the blessing of growing up in church. My grandparents were Catholic, and they changed from Catholicism to Pentecostal church when my dad was young. So they became very involved in their church. My mom and my dad, my mom in church, they were very involved with their youth group. So when my sister and I were born, we were born right into church. It was part of our lives. We were going Wednesday nights, Friday nights, Saturday, Sunday mornings, go home for lunch, so you go back Sunday night. So it was a very big part of my life. So I can't ever say I remember that one instant where I said, okay, Jesus, come into my life. It's just always been there. And I remember actually as like a kindergartner singing church songs at school. I remember in third grade, I was trying to write a sermon during a free period, and my teacher told me to stop. And you don't do that stuff in school. So I say all that to say, it was a big part of my life. And growing up Pentecostal actually made it an even bigger part. It's a Pentecostal church, you were always expected to be there. Wednesday night services, prayer meetings, mornings, evenings, youth group. It was your life, and it was very lively too. Which I remember with a lot of fondness. This was a Pentecostal church of loud music, loud prayers, speaking in tongues, people dancing in the aisles, pastors, laying their hands on people and then falling down, and that was the church I grew up in. If you were being quiet, something was wrong with you. You weren't considered really, really saved until you were speaking in tongues, and it was just normal for me. You grow up with that I was like, go to other churches, and it was like, well, where's this isn't live, this isn't church. God isn't being glorified here. Who's the one speaking in tongues? Where's the message? Where's the response? Where is all that stuff? If it's not there, it's not church. don't agree with that now, but that was the way I grew up. But I will say that doing that, it really fostered a relationship with Jesus more than understanding him just from the book and understanding from the intellectual standpoint. So I started off, I think, for me, it was the best way to start off, was really focused on your relationship with Jesus, not the intellectual part that you try to analyze. That came later. But the beginning, especially as a kid, he was there. He was my savior, he was my friend, he was my confidant, he comforted me. In fourth grade, I was nervous about a book report or a presentation, I could pray. And I was taught, God hears you, God will answer that prayer. Sometimes he didn't, because I always had to do the book report, or I had to give the speech. He didn't come back and take us all to heaven before I had to give the project, but I got through it and I lived. And so that was the way I grew up. I watched cartoons like Superbook, the Flying House, and along with G.I. Joe and He-Man, but that was my entertainment was church related. All my friends were from church. Either my family, my cousins, or church friends. And that was until junior high. I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, and I was there till I started. 3/4 way through 8th grade, we moved from Toledo to Naperville, to Chicago. And that was probably one of the first big events that changed my life. More so than just geography. A lot of people move and we talk and, kids, they move, they don't like it, but then they find new friends, they survive. This changed my life for a different reason. So I was no longer with my church family, and we couldn't really find a church here that was the same as what we had there. I wasn't with my cousins. So I wanted to go back, and my mom wanted to go back. My sister wanted to go back. My dad, who had moved us here because of his work, he would prefer to go back too, but he was realistic. He was like, well, I had to work. I got to pay the bills. There was no job for me left in Toledo. We had to move here. And so I said, well, I had been taught about prayer. Prayer works, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to solve this God's way. So we prayed. And, I was taught, that, you have the faith of a mustard seed. Whatever you believe, you're going to get. Tell that mountain to go jump in the water, you're going to get it. I'm like, well, I'm not trying to move a mountain. I just want to go home. Where I'm at. And plus, I'm trying to go home to go back to church. So even more so why God would answer my prayer. And so we started our journey. We got books on the right scripture that you have to pray to get what you want. We followed all the things that we had been taught. We prayed out loud. We prayed as a group. We came together. Where 2 or more are gathered, God's there. He's going to answer your prayer. You didn't have any doubts. And if you had doubts, you would analyze your doubts and you figure out, okay, well, that's not really me. I'm going to forget that doubt. That doubt didn't count. We would follow the formula that we had been taught would work. And so we were going to go home. I even told the few friends I had, hey, I'm not going to be here next year. This is nice meeting you guys. I'm not going to be here after the summer. I'm moving back. And they were like, oh, wow, you just got here. Like, yeah, I know, but, I'm moving back. So I was speaking it out loud, and therefore God was going to answer my prayer. He did. That was probably something that hit me harder then than I would ever realize until later on. Because come freshman year, I was registering for school. I had gone back to stay with my grandmother and my cousins, had a wonderful summer. And I thought, well, I'm just going to stay here because my parents are going to be moving back. I had to go home. They came and got me. They said, no, you got to go back to school. So we looked at it and like, well, why didn't God answer prayer? I had done everything right. And, well, maybe there was that time I doubted a little bit more than I should. And then keep in mind, I'm 13 years old. So I'm really struggling in my mind with what had happened. what did I do wrong? Because it can't be God. I did something wrong, right? I was the one that must have not done something right. Maybe I was supposed to read, John before I was supposed to read, Mark, or maybe I was supposed to quote more from the Old Testament than I was the New Testament. I never figured out how to speak in tongues. That must have been it. I didn't say the words in the right magical way. And therefore, God's like, oh, I really want to answer your prayer, but you didn't do this one thing right. So sorry, you're stuck now. And so I started high school, and we never really found a church that was like the family that we had before. So we stopped going. And we would still go on Sundays, but it was less of a priority. And I do want to mention, I still believe in prayer. I'm a huge believer in prayer. And, to this day, I want to teach my kids to pray. But it was that formula part that, I look back on now, that was my mistake. Not God's mistake, that was my mistake, and I feel the people who were teaching me at the time. So I still think that prayer is huge, but I think it's one of those things that can be misused and that can be used to keep people from really figuring out what God wants. Because so many churches to this day make it about what you're doing, not about what God's doing. So I still believe in prayer, and I think it's important. So anyway, back to my story here. As I said, I was shook up, and so church became less of a thing in my life. And God's always been there for me. Jesus has always been a huge part of my life, but his voice that I felt like I heard very strong became quieter, and that feeling that I had when I would, be doing something became less. And so church became just something we did on Sunday mornings, and everything else was just living life. I didn't have a lot of friends when I first moved here because I thought I was going home, so I'd make friends. I was going to leave them anyway. And so I decided I want to make friends. I'm in high school. I'm not happy just being home all the time, so I'm going to make friends. And I did. I made a lot of friends. They weren't Christian friends. And don't know how things spiraled the way they did, but definitely made some bad choices. And when I started to make my high school friends, and I started what I would call the Christian downfall of justification. Because I said Jesus was there. I would feel things, but I wasn't making the right choices, and I would justify them. And I would say, my friends are drinking, but it's okay because I'm not. My friends are doing drugs, but it's okay because I'm not. I didn't start that fight. It's not my fault. I was with that group, but I didn't do this or I didn't do that, so I'm okay. God can't be mad at me because I'm okay. Yeah, everyone around me, maybe not so much, but I'm okay. And it started to build up. And there were so many things that I would say I was involved in and I did that I would regret, and I regret to this day. I don't like to talk in like details. It's just a matter of, you're a high school kid, you were in Naperville, and I know people say, well, it's Naperville, right? It's not that bad. There's no gangs, there's no stuff. There are plenty of ways for kids to get in trouble, no matter where they are. No matter what the income level is, no matter what the upbringing is, youth, teenagers can make very bad decisions where they are. So that's where, I think the work of Jack and Kevin, these guys, is so important, because those high school years can really be a turning point for so many. So I said I was walking the life of justification. I was walking the line, or so I thought of, being able to have these people that I counted as my friends, and yet I still had Jesus. I still went to church Sunday morning, so I must be okay. But after a short time of enjoying and the things that was going on, I began to really hate my decisions, and I began to really be miserable. And I wanted to stay home more than go out, but I definitely felt like things were out of control. And, because you still had to go to school, so it's not like you just say, well, I'm gonna stop hanging out, because you still saw these people at school. And so I said I felt that sense of out of control, and that feeling that I used to have that where God was there wasn't as there anymore. I really couldn't find him. I couldn't, even prayer was just more of a perfunctory thing than actual use in my daily life. So I couldn't figure out how to get out. But I made it senior year, and I couldn't wait to graduate. Didn't want to go to graduation because I just wanted it to be over. My parents made me go. I went, but I said, okay, I can start going to college, so I can start a new life. And none of my friends were going to college, and none of them were going to UIC. I had picked UIC back in junior year because I thought I wanted to stay close. Like I knew I wanted to go to college, but I wanted to stay close because I had my friend group that I didn't want to leave. And by senior year, I'm like, wait, can I go somewhere else? So you don't. But I had received a scholarship to UIC, so that's where I was going. And it turned out to be a really good choice. But at that point came the next big event. We had been here 4 years, and my dad says, okay, we're moving. I got a new job in Texas, moving to Austin. And so this is me senior year, wanting to escape, but not wanting, afraid to go that far. So my sister had already, she's 2 years older than me, so she had already gone off to college. She was in Bowling Green, Ohio, with, so she was really close to my grandparents. So she was gonna stay, and my dad's like, well, you can stay, but you're on your own, or you can come with us and transfer, take a year off, figure out what you want to do, pick a different college. I said, I'm gonna stay. And 18, I'm old enough, right? So I decided to stay. I wouldn't be going to that church in Naperville because it never felt like home. So why would I want to go way over there? So I moved closer to where I was going, downtown. And my mom, who was a strong believer, said, we gotta find you a home church. And so I'm like, well, don't really waste your time because I'm not gonna go. And so no, we're gonna find you a home church. I'll feel better leaving if I know there's a church that you can go to, even if it's just sometimes. So through my mom's brother's wife, so my aunt, she had a cousin, so you can follow along there, who's going to a really small Pentecostal church, because that's what we had known, on the south side of Chicago, so 31st and Halstead. It's a really small church. So my mom's like, well, let's go visit. You never know. Walk in the door, I meet everybody in the first day. It was a very small church, and they were really nice people. It was a group of kids that were around my age, late high school, early college. So I said, okay, yeah, Mom, make you feel better. I'll call this church, and this is where I'll go. And the people took an 18-year-old kid in. My mom's, I call her my aunt, even though she was not related. That took years of explaining, and I think to this day most people think I'm still related to her. But she acted like I was a long lost nephew, and she had daughters and kids, and so they took me in. If I needed something, I knew that they were there. I knew that I could call out, car troubles, which I had a lot of, or other things. So this church became my home. Now, this was a Pentecostal church, but it didn't have the the pastor there was a fantastic guy, and it was an Assemblies of God church, but there was no dancing, there was no, speaking in tongues, there was no falling, being slain in the spirit, so they talked a lot about relationship, which I always liked about the church growing up, but didn't have the other stuff. And he was very much a realist, and, preaching of the congregation he was preaching to, he had to be a realist. So he definitely made church a fun place to be again, a place that I felt home. So I started attending, and, at 18 years old, I felt like, okay, now this is my decision to attend. This is not my parents making me go. This is not my parents, saying, okay, you go to church or you're under my house, my rules. So I was under my own apartment, my own rules. My parents were in Texas. They didn't know what I was doing. I could tell them I was going and not go. But I made the decision to go because I saw what life was like without going. And I said, I want to get back into it. But it was hard because I was very fresh from a lot of mistakes. So I spent time praying again, though it was hard because prayer didn't work, but it does work. So it was just, again, 18, right? So trying to figure it all out. So I remember praying, not that bad, and, struggling with that. And, I remember, I guess probably the biggest feeling was letting God down. Because my friends from high school were making the worst decisions I was making. They weren't brought up in church. They didn't have families that had believed in church. They didn't have grandparents who would tell you stories of their faith. They didn't have a mom who would tell you how God had saved her from living on the streets and the abuses that she went through. Now, she could tell a story. Now, she could be up here for an hour and really floor you guys. Her story is a lot more interesting than mine, a lot more incredible. You see God's hand in her life a lot more than you see mine. So I had that in my heart. So okay, I was exposed to that, and yet I still made bad decisions. So I felt my decisions were worse than others because I knew better. And so that was probably the biggest struggle when I started going there again was, how do I go back after I spent, again at 18, spend 4 or 5 years of your life, that's a big part of your life, justifying the way I was living, ignoring God, ignoring what I had been taught. So how do I go back? I remember praying, God, I made a lot of mistakes. And very clearly, I remember an answer saying, yeah, you have. And, I don't deserve forgiveness. And he's saying, no, you don't. And, like I said, my word, my deeds, they'll never make up for what I've done. And I'm saying, no, they won't. What you do will never be. But you're not enough. I'm enough. If you don't make up for it, I did. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. Because it was the gospel, right? Doesn't matter where you come from, doesn't matter what you've done, doesn't matter what you've known, it doesn't matter if you made small mistakes or big mistakes. In God's eyes, we've all made the same mistakes. Doesn't matter anything, God did it for us. God did it for you, He did it for me. So that really just changed things. So the first time, when I would say for the first time, I really understood what it meant to be a Christian. What it meant to really follow and make that decision to serve Christ. So I became involved in my little church. I was going to school. I was having a great time. I had a great group of friends at school. Like I said, it was a really small church. You know, maybe we had 50 at a good day when I started. So there was a lot of things to get involved in. You want to be involved, you're going to find something for you to do. So I became involved with the small youth. We would do skits. We would go out to the neighboring communities and and do plays on the streets and the sidewalks. We would try to administer to people we found and fed the homeless. And it was the middle of the Bridgeport area, which has now become a little nicer than it was back then. Gang members across the street and rough area, drive-bys, but they always left the church alone. And they knew there was a group of us that go to that church, so I would have no issues going there at 10 at night on a Friday, leaving there late. The people around the church would have such a big respect for the pastor, and so they knew we were with him. We wouldn't have any issues. So I even played in the band. I started just playing guitar just to try to learn something. And when you're in a small church, you got to pick up a guitar. You're on the stage. We need all the help we can get. So became an usher. I eventually, by the time I was a member of the board. So I spent 8 years of my life in that church. And recently, the pastor there celebrated 25 years of that church, and it's still a small church. And in his sermon, which is a surprise, so he did it off on the spot, was that church got us set up for a season of life. There are people who've been there forever, and those are fantastic people. But there's so many people like me who come in and out of that church of a season of life. And he went on example after example of how that lighthouse in 31st and Halstead has been used by God to really just help people at a time in their life. He's like, he'll never be a mega church. He doesn't want it. He loves being where he is. He loves being what he's doing. He's such big kids and youth. He's such little kids, adults, every season of life. So he talked, and it really hit me even listening to that. That was true. God used that church for a season of life that really helped me bridge the person who I had been to become who I was going to be. So in that time, studying at school, another big event happened. I met the person that would become my partner in life. And she can leave now if she wants. Embarrassed. And she was studying chemical engineering. I was studying electrical engineering. So we met through a Hispanic organization that I was leading at the time of engineers. And we liked each other right away, at least for me. I kind of knew from very early on that this is where my life is going to go. Here's who I'm going to partner with. So we had a lot of dates, especially in the library. I spent a lot of time studying, and she actually helped me, because I was doing a lot back then. I was leading a student organization. I was trying to get people jobs at school. I was trying to network for my own future and career. I was very involved in my church. I was doing a lot of everything but studying. So she helped me realize, well, hey, you're going to graduate. You might want to open a book or two. So she helped me to do that. And she's been helping me ever since by just asking those little questions about well, you want to graduate, why aren't you studying? And, you can't do everything. You want to do as much as do everything, and then do everything half as bad as just pick a few things and do those really well. She wasn't attending the church I was attending, but we did talk about God and her. I won't go too much into her story, but we talked about God and what she believed and family in her life. Her parents, were Catholics, but didn't attend church regularly. So, we had, we had those tough conversations, and I really felt like she was the one. And especially since I was 20 whatever years old, 21, 22, and I was really involved, I would be the one to help her, right? I would show her the way. So when, as I was talking and she would ask me questions, I was like, okay, I'm the wise one here. I'm 23 years old. I'm very wise, and otherwise I wouldn't be on the board of the church. So we would talk, and I would try to explain something like, we believe in the Trinity, and started asking really, really hard questions, like, why? Like, well, what do you mean, why? We believe in the Trinity. Well, why do you believe? And, we would talk about what God said about hell or about Jesus or about creation. And again, really tough questions like, why? How? Why do you think that's true? Why is the Bible, and I don't think she was asking because she was trying to change my mind. She was just asking just as a normal conversation of, why do you believe this? Like any other part of your life, you usually have a justification, a reason why you believe what you believe, or that you're doing what you're doing. And I started realizing, I don't know all the answers. I had done skits. I had done skits to Christian songs, played Christian songs. I was even Peter in the Easter play. So, I must, know something that she doesn't, but I couldn't explain it. So together we started, what I consider the next very important part of my faith journey, and that was to figure out why. So we would start looking at these things together. And, I was telling Terry, yes, I brought this book, a pocket book of apologetics, and I said, no, I just happened to be seeing it out there in the free library, and it reminds me of a lot of books I had around that time, and still have, because even more so than with Edith, I started thinking, well, I don't know why. I want to find out why. We met some people who would be able to justify what they're believing in very well, and I wanted to be that way. Still not as strong as I want to be, but I definitely started realizing God is the relationship is very important. And I've always looked back on fondness of my upbringing to teach me that. But it's also, you got to understand, you got to remember in general, the technical reasons. And that, I think, completes you as a believer. You can't have just one. You can't be all technical and not realize there's a relationship there. But you can't be all relationship and not realize there's a technical side there. You gotta be able to put them together in order to really, truly, I think, have an understanding of what God is and what He's doing in your life. So we looked into things together, like Trinity, Jesus, death, hell, little topics like that have an impact on our lives. And I felt my relationship getting deeper. Now, I will say we didn't find the concrete answers to everything. There was some things that I think we felt we really did understand, and there was things that we ended up just saying, okay, the Bible says this, this, and this, so we're gonna accept Jesus. We gotta accept some things out there. And maybe there are people out there that can explain certain things better, but some things I just accepted. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay. And I think that's just the way God is as big as He is. We can't always understand it with our minds here on earth. So we got through college, and we worked for a few years after college, and we got married. So we started our life together. And a year after we got married, our oldest came along, Joshua. He came along, and so that, I think, really changed how I was going to be living my life, because it was no longer a search for my own answers. out was I had a responsibility. It wasn't just Edith and I trying to figure out for ourselves. We had a family that we were responsible for. And the new chapter was, how do I raise a kid? How do I teach him about God? How do I instill in him the beliefs that I wanted him to have? I had no idea. I'm still working on that. There's some easy things. You got to take them to church. You got to talk to them about God. You have to live by an example. You have to say the prayer at dinner. But to really, truly give them the same faith you have comes so hard. And it's something that I'm still trying to work on, and I rely on people, say, Jack, to help in that way. And Kevin Brzezinski, who hits a lot of youth. I really look, because when they're younger, it's easy. You take them to church, they learn the songs, and to them it's about the fun. But when they get to that high school age and they really start trying to figure things out for themselves, it's scary. And I'm still there. We have 3 kids because one wasn't enough. And I think one of the biggest things I realized when I had Joshua was he needs to take up a lot of time. They take up a whole lot of time. And when you're trying to say, okay, I'm embarking on my career, I want to get deeper with my relationship with God, and now you have this little thing that takes up all your time, it becomes hard. You start to learn there's only so much time a day. How do I do this? So we were starting, I think, to get a handle on it when he was around 3. I started sleeping through the night. I could start sleeping again, and when you start sleeping, you realize, wow, your brain gets a lot more clarity when you get 8 hours of sleep. So we decided to have another kid, and you think 1 is hard, 2 is harder. Math just works out that way. And so then we became very busy again, and even busier because now we had, a preschooler and a baby. And then 3 years later, we did it again. And by a choice, we wanted 3 kids. And so it became really a focus of how do I just organize my life between career and church, family and obligations. And that's the part of my journey that I'm still in. And I look at that like Terry and say, Terry, help me out here. How do you do it? You did it. How did it go? Because it's so important to instill that belief, and yet there's no magic way to do it. So, as Terry said, we've been here 13 years because, that whole gotta give them a home church part was important. And it took us a while to find that. We had gotten married, we were in Chicago, we were looking all around for churches. We attended a few churches that we liked, but spending a lot of time in the car in the parking lot while he slept, or in the foyer because he was crying because he wouldn't go to the nursery. So, it took us a while to really figure out how to get our feet under us. And when he was 3, we met through preschool, the Runyons, and they told us about this church. And so we started coming here, and we've been here ever since. And after I've been here, we've been here a few years, I was asked to serve as a deacon, and I remember sitting in front of the session and them saying, why do you want to serve? And my answer then was, I work at a job that's a minimum of 50 hours a week. I have 2 kids with 1 on the way. I have never had less free time in my life. And then I got a couple of looks from the session, like, okay, that's not answering your question. Why do you want to serve? I said, well, I need something that's for me to keep me centered. Because if God isn't the center of my life, how can I expect him to be the center of my kids' life? That the whole gotta live by example thing. So I became a deacon, great 6 years. And since then I've tried to serve as best I can, kids night, with the youth. A lot of it, because I wanted to help out. And that was just my nature. I've always wanted to be as involved as I can in the church I was going to. I think it's an obligation of ours to do as much as you can. But some of it is also selfish because I get to see my kids, you know, I get to do kids night with my kids. I get to, you know, now, you know, with Jack, you know, I get to be leading a small group with Jack, with my oldest in there, and talk to him about things in a way that you don't talk to him about when it's just us, because now there's other people. So there's selfish reasons, I will admit, but it's also, I enjoy being a part of the church. So still on my journey, still on the roller coaster. You know, I have my ups, I have my downs. I have times where I feel like I'm really nailing this Christian thing, and times where I'm like, no idea if God knows who I am still, because it's just, you know, so much to do and so little time to do it in. So I would say that, you know, justification was the kind of the word of my youth. You know, fear has been the word of my adulthood to this day. Fear of not doing it the right way, fear of not being able to pass what I believe on to my kids, fear of not supporting my family, fear of not being there. So that's where guys had to meet me now. To say, again, you're not going to do it. I'm going to do it. You're not going to make your kids Christians. You're not. You're not going to make them believe. No matter what you do, no matter what formula you do, it goes back to, you know, well, if I take them to Sunday school, if I put the Christian cartoons on, if I listen to Christian music in the car, they're going to be Christians, right? No guarantee. So it's hard to say, it's not my way, God's going to do it. I believe in Him for that, which is hard. But that's where I am. So I think I'm supposed to do 45 minutes on the road, but kind of at the end of my journey here, so yeah, that's me. 40, how old am I? 43, I think. got a birthday coming up, so I get confused. But that was my journey.
Thanks for sharing.
Sounds like your mom was an influence because of her story. Has she been an influence on your kids with her story and her faith?
Yes. Yeah, she's living with us right now for a couple of months. And she definitely has, you know, they've heard some of her story. I think she chooses not to tell a lot of it because it still hurts. She's had a hard life, and then, you know, her and my dad got divorced about 8 years ago, which has still been hard for her. So she's shared what she can, and I've shared some that I felt comfortable sharing. But they know that how important God is in her life and how much He's done for her. Maybe not the specifics, all the specifics, but definitely a lot of it. I would say so.
Do you feel that you said that when you and Edith met, she sort of asked you the why questions, and you're like, well, I don't know why. And do you feel that your kids are asking those questions, and do you feel like that's an important thing for you to try to instill in your kids, the kind of the why behind how your faith?
Yes, I don't think, you know, Joshua's 16, so he's the oldest, so I think he's getting at that age. And he hasn't specifically asked yet, but I think a lot of it is because we try to be a little more proactive in just explaining the why before we get asked the questions. Sorry, Jack, I'm picking on you a lot, but I think, you know, in our small group, you know, Jack and I have tried to do that. We try to answer more of that why, which I never had when I was growing up in church. You know, it was more about singing the songs and doing the things than reading. You read the Bible, obviously, because you had to, but no one ever talked about where it came from. No one talked about how the Bible came to exist. It was God's word. You know, we all get that, but who put the Bible together? Somebody did. You know, this isn't the tablets from Ryan. It's something that's put together by men who were inspired by God. So we try to answer some of them before they get asked, or I hope. And some of it, I think, they just haven't started to understand their own questions yet. You know, our daughter is 13 and our little guy is 10, so yeah, they have a little bit to go. So that's where I say I'm halfway through because I got a long way to go with them and in their life and their journey.
You had some experiences with different relocating and going into new churches, and some did, some did not. How does that experience relate to what you see our church doing to relate to people, new people coming into the church, or being invited in, or
Yeah, I think it's the openness. You know, when we first started attending here, we felt welcomed right away. You know, there was a huge group of people. We saw the youth sitting together, which was, I think, huge important to us. Josh's only 3, but it showed like, okay, we want that. We want a church that's gonna have people that are really dedicated to the youth and they're together, so that forms that core, which I think is important, because prior to going through high school, when you're the only Christian, so when you see there's other Christians in maybe you sit in a church, and so when you sit in school, like, okay, I'm not alone. So I think we still do that. We were kids and they were back then, but they're still together. They still see them. We're still open, still welcome. I know what Maggie does with DBS is so important because it shows the welcomeness that this church has. People come in, kids' night, it's huge. I think we have 60 kids and they just get to know this as a comfortable place where they feel welcome, even if they don't go here. So I think that's a part of what's important. That answer kind of.
yeah, yes, it does. You speak from a family aspect, and that's where you come from, so that's where where your experience would be.
Yeah, so priority. Question?
So that's a great story. And I love the chapters that you kind of outlined. I was just curious where you kind of feel you are with prayer. And I guess my question comes from, at one point, I think you were 18-ish, and you said that prayer didn't get answered. And I think most people, I've heard people say that, well, when it doesn't get answered, it did get answered, the answer was no. But I never heard you really say that. I heard you say that you felt it didn't get answered. And so I was curious, how do you feel now? What do you feel is the strength of prayer, and where does it fit? And you said very clearly all your prayers don't get answered. You had a beautiful list of prayers that don't get answered for a lot of us. I'm just curious.
Yeah, prayer is still very important. I don't do it as much as I want to because of that whole time thing. But I try to study prayer more after, getting the no, and some of the things that I don't like when I hear as well, that was God's will. I don't believe that it's God's will that a kid dies of cancer. I don't believe it's God's will that some of these bad things that we pray happen. So I think prayer is taught incorrectly in so many churches that it's that formula. Prayer is a communication with God. Prayer is you talking to Him. The Bible is Him talking to you. Prayer is you talking to Him. The more you do it, you feel Him. I think, when Jesus taught us the Lord's Prayer, if you look at the whole thing, and Pastor Paul has done this a lot, and recently, and there is where we talk about, give us our daily bread, and pastors will say, well, that's God saying, ask for what you want, and then it is, but daily bread is, you need bread to live. So some of the things that we're asking for, we don't need. We want, we don't need. And I think Jesus was here as a human, so He knows what wants are. And some things are gonna happen, but God's sovereign will is what's important. And so God's sovereign will is gonna matter in prayer. Where we are here on earth, if we're in Toledo, Ohio, or Chicago, Illinois, isn't gonna affect God's sovereign will. So sometimes it's just the world is going along. God's gonna be there for you. If you really in prayer, you're gonna say, God, I'm gonna accept what is coming along, and I'm gonna be okay because you're there with me. I may not get the job I wanted, but I'm gonna get another job. I may have to deal with somebody that I'm unhappy dealing with, but you're gonna help me get through that. So if we're really truly in prayer, we're saying, God, here's my heart's desire, because I do believe that Jesus wants to hear what you want, but he's gonna say, I'm gonna help you get through this. I'm going to calm the storm, or I'm gonna help you ride out the storm. But I'm gonna be there with you no matter what. And if you believe in me, you're gonna trust me that you're gonna be okay. So prayer has become less the list of what I want and what I feel and I think I need. Because what I even think I need sometimes isn't really, when you look back on it, you're like, well, I didn't really need that. So I survived without it, and actually life is not better. You know, the jobs I hadn't gotten that I wanted or I thought I wanted worked out better that I didn't get them. So, you know, going back to Ohio to go back to church was something I thought I needed. And it turns out my life is better now that I didn't go back. So him saying no, or him not answering, or him just saying, you know, you're gonna be okay. If we had gone back, I would be okay. But I'm okay now. And so I think God's saying, I'm gonna be there with you no matter what. So prayer is you just talking to God and getting that relationship more than trying to always get what you need and want. That kind of answer.
I love the idea, it just kind of hadn't occurred to me before, to sort of have it as a conversation. It was always sort of like, what am I supposed to do and what needs to get done? And what are you gonna do for me? And to just kind of put that aside and have the second aspect of, wow, that kind of stuff, don't you agree?
Right.
I have to ask, where do you have your best conversations?
In prayer,
Yes,
where?
yes.
My car. And in my car, for sure, I get a lot of talking done in my car, whether it's once I have to call my grandmother or to call Jesus. The nightly prayer has, I spend a lot of time, so I go, each of the kids, now Josh is old enough, so I want him to learn how to pray on his own. My daughter's at that age, so I want her to pray on her own, but like my 10-year-old, we pray together every night. So I get to see that prayer in him, and by the time I get back to my room and do my thing, I'm so exhausted to pray, so I get my best conversations done in the car because I'm alone, there's no distractions, and I can turn on some music and just really let it out. Especially now that we have, those earbuds, and then when you're talking in your car, no one looks at you funny anymore. Since you're on the phone, so that's where I get most of my really deep thoughts now is in my car. Anything else?
I just want to say thank you for sharing, and I love
Yes.
the reframing of prayer from requesting to relationship and conversation, and I can really see the maturation and deepening of your faith through your story, so that helps all of us, so thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Is there any questions from the audience? Okay. All right, thank you all for coming. We are off next week for the 4th of July, unless we get 3rd of July, and then Tracy Melker will be July 10th. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you.